Um, Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little bit different today. Usually we take this really wide panoramic view of a topic, but today we're zooming in.
Yeah, microscopically in on just one single document.
Right, a document that is currently sitting on the desk of a very specific type of listener.
Exactly. If you're listening to this right now, statistically speaking, you probably have a lukewarm coffee in one hand, a highlighter in the other, and, well, a feeling of mild to moderate panic in your stomach.
Because the professional planning exam is looming.
It is.
We see you. We absolutely see you. And we know that when you look at your reading list and you see the Ontario Professional Planners Institute's standards of practice, the temptation is to just, glaze right over it.
Oh, completely. It sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Like, don't lie, don't steal, generally be a decent person. It
Right.
feels like something you can just skim and be fine.
And that is the trap.
It is a massive trap because it feels like common sense right up until you were standing in front of a disciplinary committee trying to explain why you did something that felt totally natural at the time, but was actually a technical violation of professional conduct.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take this document, the OPI Standards of Practice, and turn it from a dry PDF into basically a survival guide for you.
We aren't just going to list rules today.
No, we're going to look at the why and the how. I want to go back to a metaphor we actually discussed earlier in our prep for this deep dive. This document isn't just a rule book. It is essentially the shield and the sword for a professional planner in Ontario.
I love that framing. It really is. It's a shield because it protects you from liability and from workplace pressure, and it's a sword because it gives you the actual authority to say no when you need to.
And just to set the context before we really get into the weeds here, these standards were approved by the OPI Council to support the Professional Code of Practice.
Right, and a key distinction for the exam, you really need to know this, these standards are not legal advice.
We have to say that.
We do, but they are the benchmark. If a planner's conduct is ever called into question, the discipline committee looks directly at this document to see if you acted professionally.
So think of this deep dive as the how-to guide for keeping your RPT designation shiny and reputable. We are going to go through the 4 pillars exactly as they appear in the source text.
Which is independent professional judgment, disclosure, and the public interest trespass.
Which is surprisingly tricky.
Very tricky. And finally, conflict of interest. That structure is so important for your retention. If you get an exam question, your very first mental move should be to sort it into one of those 4 buckets.
If you can categorize the problem, you're already halfway to the right answer. So let's unpack that first pillar right now.
Yeah.
Independent professional judgment. On the surface, this sounds kind of philosophical. I give my opinion, right?
Right.
But the standards get incredibly specific about what independent actually looks like in practice. It's not just about being smart.
No, it's about being unpressured. The core definition here is that an opinion must be derived completely free of pressure, however subtle. And the text explicitly mentions subtle pressure, which I think is fascinating.
Because it's rarely overt.
Exactly. It's super rare for a boss to just say, lie for me or you're fired.
Yeah.
It's much more likely to be a workplace dynamic where, being a team player morphs into an expectation that you'll just advocate for whatever the client or the boss wants.
It's the whole don't be difficult pressure. But the standard says you cannot advocate a position other than your own professional opinion, which honestly creates a huge practical dilemma, especially for public sector planners.
Oh, the classic exam scenario.
Right. Like imagine I work for a municipality. I recommend refusing a development because it's just bad planning. But the council votes to approve it anyway. Am I now being unprofessional if I help process that approval?
And the answer there lies in the distinction between a professional opinion and an administrative responsibility. The standard is extremely clear on this. You can implement a direction from a council or a client. That's administration.
I can process the paperwork.
You can process the paperwork. You can draft the site plan agreement. What you absolutely cannot do is change your professional opinion to match their vote.
So I can't go to a tribunal 6 months later and testify, actually, no, I think it's good planning just because my boss voted for it.
Exactly. You could do the administrative work, but you can't fake the professional belief. You serve the council's direction, but you do not adopt their brain.
That is a crucial distinction. You can be a good employee and a good professional at the exact same time, but you really have to know which hat you're wearing in any given moment. Now, before a planner even gives that opinion, the document lists a sort of self-check.
Yes. 3 questions you have to ask yourself. Think of this as your pre-flight checklist.
Okay, what's number 1?
Number 1, Do I have sufficient information and resources? You cannot guess. If the client is cheaping out on the required studies, you can't just wing it and give an opinion anyway.
Makes sense. Number two.
Number 2, do I have sufficient training and experience? This is basically the stay in your lane rule. If you're a transportation planner, do not give an expert opinion on heritage conservation.
Right.
Then number 3, am I professionally objective?
Which brings us right back to the pressure thing. If you're doing it to please the boss or just because you really like the client personally, you aren't objective.
And when you do finally give that opinion, it can't just be a simple yes or no. The quality of the opinion really matters here.
The standard emphasizes that an opinion has to be balanced because most planning issues aren't just black and white.
Correct. To be professional, you have to state the benefits and the disadvantages or consequences. If you only list the pros because that helps your client's case, you aren't providing independent professional judgment.
You're advocating.
You're advocating, not analyzing.
And advocacy is fine for a lawyer, but not for a planner in this context. A lawyer advocates for their client's interest. A planner advocates for the public interest through their professional opinion. Those are vastly different mandates.
Precisely.
Speaking of advocating, let's talk about some of the hard lines in the sand in the document. Situations where you simply cannot provide an independent opinion. The text lists a few major no-go zones.
There are a few big ones you need to memorize. First is your own property. If you own land and you want to rezone it, you can argue for it, but you must explicitly state that you are acting as the owner, not as a professional planner.
You cannot provide independent judgment on your own backyard. You can't be objective about your own asset.
Exactly.
What about money?
This is a huge one. You cannot accept a bonus or a profit share that depends on the outcome of your planning advice.
So if a client says, I'll pay you $5,000 now, plus another $10,000 if council approves the permit.
That is strictly forbidden.
Because your opinion is bought at that point.
Strictly. You are suddenly incentivized to ignore bad planning to get that cash payout. However, a standard salary is perfectly fine. As long as your paycheck doesn't fluctuate based on whether you say yes or no, you're in the clear.
Okay, let's move to the second pillar. This is the one that usually creates the most anxiety for people because it deals with ethics versus the law, disclosure, and the public interest.
This is the tension between two very real duties. On one hand, the code says you must respect client confidentiality. You can't just go blabbing their secrets.
Right.
But on the other hand, your primary responsibility is always to the public interest. So what happens when keeping a client secret actively hurts the public?
It's the classic whistleblower scenario, but you can't just blow the whistle because you have a bad feeling about a project, right?
No, and the standard is very specific about the threshold for this. You can only break confidentiality if there is an adverse effect on the public interest.
Which is defined how?
Specifically, is there an imminent threat to public health or safety? Or is there a clear violation of the law?
Okay, let's create a scenario to test this. Say I find a report that my client is hiding. It shows the soil on their site is contaminated with toxic waste, and they still plan to build a daycare on it.
That's a clear threat to public health.
Right, but I can't just go tweet about it. There is a very specific, almost bureaucratic process outlined in the text for how to handle this.
Absolutely. And for you listening, this is probably the most testable procedure in the entire document. You need to memorize this exact order.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1. You talk to your employer or client first. You always try to resolve it internally. You say to them, we have to disclose this soil issue.
And if they say, no way, bury it.
Then you move to step 2. And notice, you still don't go to the authorities yet.
Right.
You consult a trusted senior OPPI colleague, and this is key. It must be in strict confidence. And this person cannot be linked to the parties involved in any way. You need an objective second opinion to make sure you aren't misinterpreting the situation.
Okay, so I ask a senior planner, and they agree with me. They say, yes, this daycare is a danger to the public. What's step 3?
Step 3 is contacting OPPI directly. But, and this is a critical detail, your initial communication must be generic. You do not name the client or the specific location yet. You are just verifying the procedure.
Wait, why generic? That feels completely counterintuitive. If there is an imminent danger, shouldn't we be specific immediately?
It feels weird, I know, but it's to protect you from liability. If you name names and it turns out you were somehow wrong about the soil data, you've just defamed a client and breached confidentiality without just cause.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you call OPPI and say, hypothetically, I have a situation involving a soil threat. My employer refuses to act, and I've consulted a senior colleague who agrees with me. What do I do?
That is a very distinct process. It's entirely about covering your bases while still doing the right thing.
Exactly. Once OPI verifies you have followed the steps, they will guide you. And this usually involves getting independent legal advice on how to proceed with the actual formal disclosure.
And the document actually mentions a caveat about what you disclose when you finally do it. It's not a data dump.
Right. It's strictly on a need-to-know basis. You only disclose the exact information necessary to prevent the threat or stop the violation.
You don't hand over the client's financial records or their marketing strategy just because they made one mistake with the soil.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It is a really delicate balance. It emphasizes that being a professional isn't just about knowing your zoning bylaws. It's about navigating these intense ethical minefields without getting yourself blown up.
Right. And speaking of getting blown up, or at least stepping in a hole, that leads us directly into the third pillar, which is often completely misunderstood: trespass.
Oh, this one catches so many people off guard.
I have to admit, when I read this section, I was surprised by how strict it actually is, because I think there is a general assumption that planners are sort of like semi-official government agents who can just pop by the site to take a look whenever they want.
That is a massive misconception.
Yeah.
And the standard is here to crush it entirely.
Yeah.
Planners have absolutely no statutory right of entry.
None.
None. Surveyors have some rights. Utility workers might. Planners do not. You are just a civilian.
So if I walk onto a site without permission just to take a few photos for a staff report, I am legally trespassing.
You are, and that's a direct violation of the Trespass to Property Act. The document is crystal clear. You need explicit consent from the occupier.
Wait, occupier, not owner.
Yes, note the word occupier. If the land is leased to a tenant, say, a farmer renting a field, the owner cannot give you permission to go trample the crops. The tenant has the final say.
That's a great detail. And the text gets into some really interesting specifics about what even counts as premises. It's not just a fenced-in lot.
It's surprisingly broad. Premises includes water, ships, trailers, portable structures, anything you can enter or be on. But the part that really catches people off guard is the implied prohibition.
The garden rule.
Yes. Under the Act, entry is prohibited without notice, meaning no trespassing sign is even needed, if the land is a garden, under cultivation, or a woodlot where the trees are less than 2 meters tall.
Okay, explain the tree thing. Why 2 meters?
Because it implies it's a plantation. If the trees are baby trees, someone is actively growing them as a crop or for restoration. If you walk through there, you might damage that crop. So the law automatically assumes you are not allowed there.
So if I walk into a field of corn or a Christmas tree farm, I am trespassing, even if the front gate is left wide open.
You absolutely are. And the risk here isn't just getting a trespassing fine. The standard explicitly mentions the Occupier's Liability Act.
Which means?
If you are trespassing legally, you are deemed to have willingly assumed all risks.
So if I sneak onto a site just to double check a setback measurement and I fall into an open excavation pit?
You're on your own. You cannot sue the owner for negligence because you weren't supposed to be there in the first place.
That is genuinely terrifying from a liability standpoint. So what is the best practice here? How do we actually do our jobs if we can't legally see the site?
Get it in writing. Always. If you're in the public sector, the standard strongly encourages municipalities to add a right of entry clause directly to their development application forms.
Like, by signing this application, you grant city staff the right to enter for inspections.
Exactly. It solves the problem instantly.
And for private consultants.
Put it right in your retainer letter. Have the client sign off on right of entry at the very beginning of the project before you ever visit the site. Simple, but essential.
Okay, let's move to the fourth and final pillar: conflict of interest.
This is the big one. We hear about it constantly in the news, but the technical definition here is very specific. Your primary responsibility is to the public. A conflict is defined as a personal or pecuniary interest that is not nominal.
Pecuniary just means monetary, right?
Money, and it's not just my money.
No, it extends to your spouse, your family, or your business associates. If your spouse owns the construction company that will build the project you are officially recommending for approval, that is a massive conflict.
Even if I don't get a dime directly into my own bank account.
Exactly, because your household still benefits. The text mentions 3 types of conflict you have to watch out for: actual, apparent, and foreseeable. Actual is obvious. It's happening right now. But apparent conflict seems like the really tricky one to navigate.
It is the trickiest. Apparent conflict means that a reasonable person, knowing the facts, would suspect a conflict exists. Even if you know in your heart you are 100% honest and unbiased. If it looks fishy to an outsider, it's a
Yep.
violation.
It's the Caesar's wife principle. You must be entirely above suspicion.
Exactly. And foreseeable means you can just see it coming down the road. You know your brother-in-law is buying land in the specific district you manage. You have a professional duty to flag it before it becomes an actual problem.
There's also a whole section here on moonlighting that I think is highly relevant for planners who try to juggle multiple roles. What are the rules for working for a public agency and a private client at the same time?
The rules are incredibly strict to prevent any sort of influence peddling. Here is the basic breakdown. If you are an employee of a public agency, say you're a city planner, you cannot work for a private client within your own jurisdiction without written consent and full disclosure.
Which makes sense. You can't review your own private consulting work on behalf of the city. That would be absurd.
It would be, but people try it. And it goes the other way, too. If you are a private consultant hired by the city to do a specific study, say, drafting a new downtown parking strategy, you cannot take on private clients in that same downtown area if there's a possibility of conflict, unless you get explicit consent.
Because you can't write the rules for the city on Monday and then help a developer exploit those exact same rules on Tuesday.
Spot on. There's also a very specific rule about submitting applications. A public employee cannot advise on an application that they submitted themselves.
So if I am a planner for the city, but I submit a minor variance application for a renovation on my own house, I cannot be the staff member advising council on it.
You have to step entirely back. You are just a citizen in that scenario.
So if we do identify a conflict, or even just the appearance of one, what is the actual fix?
The main remedy is disclosure. It must be in writing, and it must be timely. You tell your employer, you tell the client, you say, hey, my cousin owns the property next door to this development.
And often just putting it openly on the table solves the problem because everyone is aware and they can just watch for bias.
Correct. Transparency goes a long way. But sometimes disclosure just isn't enough. If the conflict is too great or the perception is too damaging to the public trust, the only option is withdrawal.
You just have to recuse yourself.
You hand the file to a colleague, you leave the room during the meetings, you cut yourself off from the project.
What about those oops moments? The text calls them inadvertent conflicts, like you suddenly inherit property halfway through a project, or your firm merges with another firm that represents the opposition.
It happens. Life happens. The standard says, don't panic, but act immediately. You consult a senior OPPI colleague, similar to the disclosure process we talked about earlier. You get advice on whether you need to disclose or withdraw. The key is not to hide it and hope nobody notices.
That really seems to be the theme of this entire document. Don't hide. Whether it's a conflict, a safety risk, or a professional opinion that the client absolutely hates, bring it into the light.
That is the very essence of professionalism. Transparency in process.
Okay, let's bring this all together for the listener right now. We've covered a lot of ground today. If you are sitting in that exam room next week and a scenario pops up, what are the big takeaways?
First, judgment. Remember that your opinion is yours. It must be balanced, listing both pros and cons, and entirely free from pressure. If you are just checking boxes to please a boss, you aren't planning.
Second, disclosure. Public safety is your ace card, but you have to play it correctly. Remember the 3 steps. Employer first, then senior colleague, then OPI, and do it generically at first. Don't skip steps.
Third, trespass. You have no superpowers. You are a civilian. Get permission in writing, or don't cross the property line. Watch out for those implied prohibitions like gardens and young trees.
And finally, conflict of interest. It involves money or family. It can be real or just look real. And the fix is written disclosure or total withdrawal.
And if I could just offer one final exam tip for everyone studying.
Please hit them with it.
In any multiple choice scenario involving these topics, the correct answer is almost always the one that involves following the procedural steps, like consulting a colleague or documenting a file, rather than the answer that suggests immediate drastic action like calling the press or quitting your job on the spot. The standards are about process and due diligence, not heroics.
That is fantastic advice. It's not about being a hero, it's about being a professional.
Exactly. Follow the process.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one thought from the text that I found really grounding and then build on it just a little bit. The document talks about the stamp, that physical seal you get when you finally become a registered professional planner. It says the stamp isn't just a tool for you to use. It represents the collective reputation of the entire institute.
It really does. Every single time a planner cuts a corner on trespass or fudges an opinion for a quick bonus, It devalues the stamp for everyone else. These standards are rigid because the reputation of the profession is shared property.
It is. But I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought as you go back to your studying. We know these standards are incredibly rigid to protect that reputation, but society isn't rigid. What happens when the definition of the public interest fundamentally shifts, say around the housing crisis or climate change, and the formal standards haven't fully caught up yet? When you get out there into practice, you'll have to ask yourself, in those gray areas, do you strictly follow the letter of the standard to protect the profession from liability? Or do you follow the spirit of an evolving public good?
Ooh, that is something to chew on once you have that stamp in your hand.
Exactly. So when you're memorizing these lists today, remember you're protecting your future colleagues, but you're also preparing to navigate a very real, very complex world. Good luck with the exam. You've totally got this.
You really do. Just read the questions carefully.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.